Hello, my name is Elizabeth G, and I'll be discussing plastics and petroleum and its effects on human health and the environment. I may be talking a little bit fast, but there is a lot of information that I'd like to cover. So a little bit of background about plastics. We all know that it takes a very long time for plastics to decompose and break down in the environment, and these are some reasons why. So plastic is basically made from some chemicals extracted from petroleum and then created to form carbon-to-carbon chains, which is something that is not naturally found in the environment. So organisms that have adapted and evolved to break down frequently seen chains, such as nitrogen to carbon chains, when they come across this new one, they don't have the metabolism or enzymes to break that stuff down. In production, there are also these things called nurdles, which are basically these little beads of raw material plastic that is more preferably used to create new plastic objects like water bottles. So when we recycle other plastic material and we think that it gets reused, most of the time it actually doesn't and gets put into landfills. Some effects of plastics for humans, plastic contains toxins that leach into the environment and eventually travel up the food chain. As it gets higher up the trophic levels, we actually get more and more concentration of those toxins. Some of those include lead, BPA, bisphenol A, and mercury. Bisphenol A is especially detrimental because it affects our estrogen hormones and also insulin intake. And we know that lead and mercury also affect child development as well as brain development and defects. Some effects of plastic in the environment are premature death, strangulation, and starvation. As you can see with the turtle in the middle, it has a line wrapped around it and it grew around it, causing this deformation. This in turn also affects the organ growth inside the turtle and can also result in death. The top bird on the right hand corner is a juvenile bird, and we can see that its stomach is full of plastic pieces that it mistakenly thought of as food. And so when this happens, animals actually consume all these plastics thinking it's food and feeling full, but end up not receiving all that nutrients and energy they need, so they keep eating more and more until their stomach is full of plastic and they eventually starve to death. Similarly with sea turtles who normally eat jellyfish, when they see floating plastic bags, they eat that, and that bag actually blocks the intestines and leads them to starve as well. Plastics are also known to be called sponges because they absorb other toxins in that environment, so animals that are eating these directly also get a double whammy in absorbing more toxins. Some background of petroleum, also known as fossil fuels, it is caused or created from the high temperature and high pressure against ancient plants and animals, which is then compacted and created into this sludge and oil that we now use as fuel for manufacturing and vehicles. When we use this as gas, it gets emitted into the atmosphere as CO2 exhaust, and we all know that that is a huge contributing factor to global warming. This is a picture, the Liberia tar pits are a perfect example of this oil bubbling up from the crust. Some effects of petroleum on humans is all dependent on sex, age, state of health, and how long you've been exposed to it. When people use the term total petroleum hydrocarbons, this means that petroleum is basically contained of a variety of chemicals, and so it's very difficult to depict or separate one chemical from the other and how individually it affects a person. So total petroleum hydrocarbon is measured as the entirety of that sample. But we do know that petroleum does affect our lungs and irritates our lungs and our skin if we come into contact with it. Some effects of petroleum in the environment. In the water, we think of oil spills. A very big one was the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010 that affected hundreds of thousands of marine life, including sea lions and especially birds. As we can see here, that the oil covers the birds' feathers, preventing them from flying or preventing them from swimming. And a lot of animals actually have some kind of special coating on them, but with this oil sludge covering that, they are unable to do that and may ingest it as well while grooming. Also prevents them from seeing possibly and eating, and just ultimately leads to death. It also deprives lands of UV light because it's so thick. It prevents bottom dwelling plants from reaching sunlight, which can also create vast deserts of inhabitable areas in the water. In soil, there are microorganisms that can break down these hydrocarbons, but too much of it has shown to slow fertility and growth of those animals, resulting in a slowed growth and productivity of the environment itself. In the air, as stated previously, we do emit CO2 when we do use petroleum, and also during extraction of that in the environment, it also can release methane, which is a much more powerful greenhouse gas. Some treatments for plastic. So I do want to acknowledge first of all that there are many alternatives being invented as well, such as edible spoons, cups, water bottles, and biodegradable bags, such as shrimp shell-based bags, to replace the plastic ones that we use while shopping. But for the sake of time, we do just want to reference a few treatments for plastic cleanup. So one of them is the Seabin project. It's already been settled, it's already been invented. You can actually buy these online. It's basically a rubber bin that sucks surface water and the trash that is floating there, and it brings all that into this net below the surface, and it pushes all the water out while keeping all the trash in. This can be used in commercial ports and marine docks and stuff like that. And what's amazing is that this can actually catch and keep microplastics as small as 2 millimeters, which is important because that includes microbeads that are very small and very hard to clean up, and are also very susceptible for smaller organisms to ingest. Another one is the ocean cleanup, if anyone's heard of it. It was invented and created by a young man named Boyan Slat, whose mission is to help clean up the Pacific Garbage Patch, which is the ocean, or the world's largest garbage island in the oceans today. So in 2017, they released a second prototype in the North Sea to test its durability, and they found that the original moored system, which was basically tying this barrier down to the ocean's floor, was not allowing the flexibility needed to create a U shape to keep the debris, so they transitioned to a free-floating barrier instead. So this means that they use the natural ocean currents to push the large debris towards the barrier, and then there's a drift anchor below that slows the ocean currents and allows the plastic to float faster than the water, and then it traps all the large debris against the barrier, and then ships will come and collect it and bring it to shore before all these large pieces of trash gets broken down into microplastics. And what's exciting about this is that they announced in 2018 that this year they plan on releasing the first system in the Pacific Ocean. There's also the plastic-eating fungus. So fungi are Mother Nature's greatest decomposers and have become extremely well adapted to crazy and different extreme environments. And so students at Yale University discovered this, or didn't discover, but they extracted this type of fungus, generally living symbiotically in some plants in the Amazon, and found that they were able to decompose plastics in aerobic and anaerobic conditions. And this information is extremely useful because a lot of ground-dwelling fungi cannot break down plastic without oxygen. So now that we know that there are species that can do it without oxygen, we can maybe perhaps use this in landfills that might be deprived of that gas. There's also the fungi mutarium prototype, which uses these two stated mushrooms with the use of agar molds that has the nutrients they need to stimulate the fungi to break down this plastic. And this is what those two look like. That the white thing is the agar mold and the black is the plastic. And the idea is that once it's broken down, we can eat them. So now I'll be talking about treatments for petroleum, including bioaugmentation, biostimulation, and then ElastTech as a company itself. So bioaugmentation is a genetically specific bacteria designed to break down PHCs, or petroleum hydrocarbons, in a contaminated area. It's most commonly used in wastewater treatment plants, but can also be used in groundwater to treat groundwater and soil as well. So these bacteria are specific strains that are designed and specialized in breaking down only one specific contaminant or pollutant. And biosimulation is also another form of bioremediation that is also being suggested to combine with bioaugmentation to create the most efficient form of treating these polluted areas. And biosimulation is basically the addition of generally limited nutrients in the environment. So if the indigenous bacteria are surrounded by hydrocarbons, they can break it down, but may not have the other chemicals needed to have the energy to break that stuff down. So if they're missing nitrogen and phosphorus, for example, researchers can insert that into the said soil, and which will give the bacteria enough fuel to break down those pollutants. And finally, ElastTech is an oil spill recovery technology company that basically just designs tons of different inventions to help clean up oil spills. The first one they invented was called the drum oil skimmer, which is the yellow machine. Basically, the cylinders rotate and collect oil, and then there's a scraper in the back that scrapes off the oil and puts it to storage. But in 2012, they won a Wendy Schmidt Award of $1 million of that orange machine, which also skims surface oil with an efficiency of 90% and is designed to attach to the side of oil recovery vessels to increase the amount of oil they collect. So I think this is amazing that overall people are improving and just continuing to improve on more and more ways that we can help clean up the damage that we've inflicted upon the earth. And I really hope that everybody learned maybe something that they didn't know before, or became more interested in something they never heard of. So I hope everyone enjoyed, and thank you for listening.